Fraud occurs most often when there's a convergence of three different factors. And it's what we call the fraud triangle, in fact. And the three elements to the fraud triangle are motive, opportunity, and rationalization. Now let's unpack that for a minute. Motive, simply put, is either need or greed. Someone is stealing because they can't pay their bills or because they're just flat greedy. They're trying to keep up with the Jones. There's psychological motives to that happening. The opportunity of the fraud triangle occurs when internal controls and systems and processes break down within a company's or a business's or a corporation's systems. Their internal controls just break down or fail. The third aspect of the fraud triangle is called rationalization. And that is when the white-collar criminal, in their mind, has justified that what they're doing is okay. They've figured out a way that they can make themselves feel better, that what they're doing is socially acceptable. The typical rationalizations that the white-collar criminal might use are, I'm underpaid, I'm underpromoted, I'm going to pay it back. But there's some kind of a psychological trigger mechanism that goes on in their mind that allows those three pieces to come together. When we talk about categories of fraud and white-collar crime, the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, breaks it down into two broad universes. The first is internal or occupational fraud, and the second is external or non-occupational fraud. So let's go through those a little bit. External, non-occupational fraud can include things like securities fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, governmental fraud, healthcare fraud, insurance fraud. And what's common to these types of fraud schemes is that there is a designated agency or group that is tasked with investigating fraud in that industry segment. When we shift focus to internal or occupational fraud, that's where we as CPAs come into play, and that's where we're important. We're literally at the tip of the spear because our clients depend on us and their own systems of internal controls to prevent, detect, and deter fraud and white-collar crime within their organization. Generally, the types of internal or occupational fraud and white-collar crime are broken down into three categories. First, there's financial statement fraud, which is the overstatement of assets and revenues or the understatement of liabilities and expenses. This is what is commonly referred to as cooking the books. This is Enron fraud. This is WorldCom fraud. It's very material in nature. It affects the shareholders. It can even affect the economy as a whole. The other two types of internal or occupational fraud are asset misappropriation, which is just basic theft. And when we go into that, we're talking about fraudulent disbursements, which can occur in the payroll cycle. They can be fraudulent payments to vendors. It can also be on the receipt side, such as skimming or lapping of accounts receivable. The third type of internal or occupational fraud is corruption, and that can include bribery, kickbacks, conflicts of interest, or even economic extortion. Fraud is best prevented by a system of strong internal controls. And controls can be preventive, they can be detective, or they can be deterrent. And we always say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound or more of the cure. When we talk about preventive controls, I give the illustration that imagine that in a room you've got something that is valuable to you, an asset that you want to protect and keep control over. And there's a door entering that room that you've got a lock on. That's a preventive control. You may have a swipe card access system. That is a preventive and access type of control. A detective type of control would be having a video camera posted inside and outside of that door to monitor who goes in and out, who has access to that asset. You may have report logs from the swipe card system that you have. The third type of control, the deterrent control that I mentioned, is I joke sometimes that it's having a 150-pound Rottweiler on the other side of the door, barking viciously. But in all seriousness, deterrent controls come from what we call the tone at the top, the corporate culture. And a lot of times it's a zero tolerance posture, position, and policy against fraud and white collar crime. It comes all the way from the boardroom down to the mailroom.